Step back in time to discover the extraordinary life of Catherine of Aragon, Henry VIII's first wife, and a princess from the powerful Spanish monarchy. From her birth in 1485 to her turbulent years as Queen of England, Catherine's story weaves political intrigue, personal tragedy, and fierce determination into one of the most compelling chapters of Tudor history. It's a December morning in 1485, and a hush falls over the corridors of Alcalá de Henares, just outside Madrid. In a warm chamber, muffled cries slip through the door, and then a single triumphant newborn wail announces the arrival of a princess, a baby girl named Catalina, soon to be known to the world as Catherine of Aragon. She doesn't know it yet, but this infant, wrapped in layers of delicate cloth emblazoned with emblems of her royal parents, will live a life filled with grandeur, heartbreak, and unyielding resilience. Through alliances forged, bargains broken, and an unrelenting battle for her dignity, she will define one of the most dramatic chapters in English history. Some might call her life the perfect example of destiny's caprices. From the moment Catherine opened her eyes, she carried the weight of Europe's shifting alliances on her small shoulders. She was the youngest daughter of two of the most notable monarchs in history, King Ferdinand II of Aragon and Queen Isabella I of Castile. Her parents, famously credited with the final chapter of the Reconquista in Spain, were no ordinary sovereigns. They were a power couple who ruled their respective realms separately. Isabella ruled Castile, Ferdinand ruled Aragon, and unified Spain in a way seldom seen before, though that unification didn't become official under a single monarch until the early 16th century. Even as an infant, Catherine's lineage glimmered with the promise of international significance. Her mother was a formidable queen, her father an astute and sometimes cunning king, and together they were shaping a new era in Iberia. They negotiated with popes allied with Holy Roman emperors and set their gaze toward the rest of Europe, eager to ensure that Spain would stand as a formidable bulwark against the rising power of France. For a princess like Catherine, this meant a life of expectation, beginning with an education so rigorous it could rival that of any European prince. Picture the royal classrooms of late 15th century Spain. Catherine, with large observant eyes, sits before venerable scholars, Dominican friars like Pascual de Ambudia and Andrés de Morales, as well as learned Italian humanists Alessandro and Antonio Geraldini. While the outside world focuses on conquests and alliances, Catherine hunches over religious texts, Latin manuscripts, and the occasional treatise on law or philosophy. She's not just a polite observer either. She's inquisitive, absorbing every lesson on scripture, liturgy, and later mathematics, heraldry, and the genealogies of Europe's great houses. By the time she finishes her teenage years, she's earned the praise of luminaries like Erasmus of Rotterdam, who admires her intellect and keen analytical mind. But education isn't all that shapes her. As a child, she travels with her parents across Spain, bearing witness to the final surrender of Granada in 1492. She may be small, but the thunder of cannon fire and the swirl of Moorish and Christian banners imprint themselves on her memory. The pomegranate, the Granada apple she later adopts as her personal emblem, carries the echoes of this climactic moment, a symbol of both the unity of Spain and the complexities of conquest that she sees firsthand. Yet Catherine's future does not lie in the sun-drenched palaces of Andalusia or the high citadels of northern Spain. A different destiny calls her to a land of damp mists and swirling political intrigues, England. In the latter half of the 15th century, the country she will one day call home has been battered by the Wars of the Roses, bloody conflicts that left the monarchy in a precarious position. Henry Tudor defeated Richard III on the field of Bosworth in August of 1485, crowning himself Henry VII. The Tudor claim to the throne was tenuous at best, riddled with uncertainties and beset by conspiracies. To solidify his dynasty, Henry VII recognizes that alliances with powerful kingdoms are more precious than gold. And so, well before Catherine is out of her infancy, negotiations begin to unite her fate with that of Arthur, Prince of Wales, Henry VII's eldest son. There's something almost surreal about how early royal marriage negotiations started in that era. Imagine Catherine playing in the gardens of the Alhambra or at the palace in Alcazar, while scribes and diplomats in thick robes are drafting treaties thousands of miles away. They deliberate over the union of a Spanish princess who has barely learned her letters and an English prince who is still in the cradle. The reasons are overwhelmingly strategic. Spain and England both eye France warily, each looking to the other for support. By 1489, the Treaty of Medina del Campo is in place. It outlines that Catherine will bring a he-eftai dowry, a matter of fierce debate, and in exchange, she'll marry Arthur. Yet even a treaty can't smooth out every wrinkle. Arguments arise over the exact size of the dowry, how Catherine's household will be maintained once she arrives in England, and whether Henry VII will remain firm in his own financial commitments. Negotiations creep along for years. During this time, Catherine grows from a toddler reciting Latin verses to a poised adolescent, well-versed in diplomacy and courtesy. Finally, in 1499, when Arthur is all of 13 and Catherine 14, a proxy marriage is held in England, ceremonial, with Catherine represented by a stand-in. At last, in 1501, Catherine herself departs Spain, setting foot on English soil at Plymouth on October 2nd. She's carried to London in a grand procession that takes 5 weeks, winding through the English countryside to the marvel and curiosity of local onlookers. The marriage proper, no longer just in proxy, takes place on November 14th in Old St. Paul's Cathedral. The ceremony is shimmering with pageantry, a swirl of scarlet robes, jewels, and banners declaring the union of two proud dynasties. Catherine, though new to England, is the center of attention, and perhaps her heart quickens with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. But if there's one thing life has taught Catherine already, it's that fortune can change with a single breath. Fate deals her an immeasurable blow only a few months later, when Arthur, her new husband and heir to the throne, sickens with the dreaded sweating sickness. Perhaps it's carried by rodents or triggered by an unfamiliar virus, but it rips through the English court, leaving devastation in its wake. Arthur and Catherine fall ill at Ludlow Castle. She recovers, weak, mourning, and alone in a foreign land. But Arthur does not survive. In April 1502, Catherine finds herself a widow at age 16, locked in a labyrinth of sorrow and political uncertainty. Her dowry was meant for the Prince of Wales, but that prince is gone. Now what? Henry VII, anxious as ever about alliances and finances, wonders if it would be prudent to marry this Spanish princess to his younger son, the future Henry VIII. The Spanish monarchs, Catherine's parents, also liked the idea of maintaining their alliance with England. Catherine, for her part, follows the direction of her parents and the English king. Another round of negotiations begins. This time, a papal dispensation is needed because Catherine was officially married to Arthur, and even though she swears their union was never consummated, the Church must approve. Everyone from ambassadors to cardinals to local clergy weighs in on whether or not Catherine and Arthur slept together. The matter will, in later years, explode into one of history's most infamous marital disputes. But for now, the story is simpler. Catherine is betrothed to young Henry. Everyone expects that once the boy is old enough, they'll go through with it, thereby preserving the Anglo-Spanish alliance. But the shifting sands of European politics quickly complicate things. Queen Isabella of Castile dies in 1504. Her crown passes to Catherine's older sister Juana, who is married to Archduke Philip of Austria, part of the Habsburg dynasty. In the blink of an eye, alliances tilt, power rebalances, and Henry VII rethinks whether Catherine is still the best option for his younger son. He dithers, halts her allowance, and contemplates forging new alliances with other European powers. All the while, Catherine is stuck in limbo, mostly confined to Durham House in London, struggling with finances, with a household that remains thoroughly Spanish, and with the challenge of learning English. By 1505, her life is a far cry from the regal existence she was promised. Occasionally, ill and perpetually uncertain, she has to draw on every ounce of her royal composure. Then comes the passing of Henry VII in April 1509. The new king, Henry VIII, is nearly 18 years old, brimming with youthful confidence and ambition. Almost immediately, Henry insists he will honor what he claims was his father's dying wish to marry Catherine, now 23, and solidify the bond between England and Spain once again. On June 11, 1509, Catherine of Aragon and Henry VIII exchange vows in Greenwich, a quieter ceremony than her wedding to Arthur, but momentous. 2 weeks later, on June 24th, they are jointly crowned at Westminster Abbey, a spectacle of medieval pomp that sets the stage for what many hope will be a golden age of Tudor rule. Catherine is anointed as queen, her hair loose in the traditional medieval style, symbolizing purity, her train supported by ladies-in-waiting as Henry glitters in cloth of gold. For the first few years, life is radiant. Henry, young, handsome, and enthusiastic, seeks to compete on the grand stage of European politics. Catherine, with her familial connections, her knowledge of courtly life, and her unwavering sense of duty, becomes an influential advisor. She supports England's alliance with her father Ferdinand against France. She even acts as governor of the realm, while Henry leads an invasion in France. Picture Catherine dressed in regal finery, seated on a throne in the king's great council, addressing urgent matters of state, rallying troops to face the Scots. In 1513, as Henry fights in France, she commands a victory at Flodden Field by orchestrating logistical and moral support for the English forces that crushed James IV of Scotland. When the victorious news arrives, it is she who dispatches the messenger to her husband. The people admire her. She is not just a wife in the shadows, but a co-ruler, in fact, at least for a time. Yet, behind these triumphs, a shadow falls. Catherine becomes pregnant soon after her wedding, but the pregnancy ends in a miscarriage in January 1510. Not long afterward, she conceives again and delivers a son, Henry, in January 1511. England rejoices. The infant is titled Prince of Wales, and it seems the Tudor line is secure. But heartbreak strikes once more. This beloved baby dies at just 7 weeks old. Further pregnancies lead to more sorrow. Either the child is stillborn or survives only a few moments. One such tragedy is believed to occur in September 1513, another in early winter 1514. The psychological and emotional toll on Catherine must have been excruciating. The royal nursery remained silent and empty. Finally, in February 1516, Catherine gives birth to a healthy daughter, Mary. It's a joy, but for Henry and for the broader political climate, a daughter is not seen as the robust solution they want. The concept of a reigning queen is not entirely new in Europe. Remember Isabella, after all. But for England, the idea of a female monarch is laced with worry. Will the nobles support her? Will foreign powers exploit this? The question of a male heir looms like a dark cloud over the radiant facade of Henry's early reign. Despite Catherine's deep devotion and unwavering sense of duty, by the 1520s, Henry's impatience is cracking through his royal composure. He is determined to have a living son and sees Catherine's age, she's 5 years his senior, as a stark reality check. He's desperate, and desperation can drive a king to extraordinary measures. Meanwhile, European politics shift yet again. Ferdinand dies in 1516, and Catherine's nephew, Charles V, inherits Spain, along with vast Habsburg territories. By 1519, Charles is the Holy Roman Emperor, ruling a colossal empire that sprawls across parts of Europe and beyond. Henry VIII, overshadowed by Charles's might, and also by the French monarchy, must continually reevaluate alliances. Catherine, although a direct link to the powerful Emperor Charles, can't solve the glaring problem of no male heir. Worse yet, Henry has begun taking mistresses. One of them, Elizabeth Blount, even bears him a son in 1519, an illegitimate boy named Henry Fitzroy, who is recognized by the king. This only further fuels Henry's conviction that the issue is not with him, but with his marriage to Catherine. By the mid-1520s, Henry VIII's dissatisfaction with his marriage to Catherine of Aragon was no longer a guarded secret whispered among intimates. He had long desired a legitimate male heir to secure the Tudor line, and as the years passed without such an heir, he began to see his marriage as the root cause of his succession worries. Henry's increasing desperation found a potent outlet in theology. He started to assert that his union with Catherine was invalid by biblical law because she had first been wed to his late brother, Prince Arthur. Echoing particular passages from the Old Testament, especially in Leviticus, Henry claimed that marrying his brother's widow had cursed their relationship, preventing them from conceiving a surviving son. Of course, Catherine denied this interpretation. She stated categorically that her marriage to Arthur was never consummated. By the time she married Henry, she was still a virgin in both body and conscience. What might have stayed a personal conflict between husband and wife erupted into a public and indeed European-wide scandal. Henry was no ordinary man. He was the King of England, and Catherine was a Spanish princess closely tied to the mighty Holy Roman Emperor, Charles V. The Pope himself could not remain a neutral bystander when two of the most powerful rulers in Europe locked horns. But for Catherine, this was also intensely personal. She was devoutly Catholic, her sense of religious duty woven tightly with her sense of royal obligation. On top of that, she had a teenage daughter, Princess Mary, whose legitimacy hinged entirely on the legality of Henry's marriage to Catherine. If the king's argument prevailed, Mary would be deemed illegitimate, a blow not just to Catherine's motherhood, but also to Mary's potential to become queen in her own right. By this stage, Catherine had spent much of her life in England, adapting to its customs, mastering the language, and serving in a variety of capacities, sometimes as de facto regent when Henry was waging war in France. She was no timid foreign consort, languishing quietly in the backdrop of court life. Instead, she had cultivated a robust network of both English and Spanish supporters. Diplomats, ambassadors, scholars, and high-ranking nobles recognized her resilience. She understood canon law, having studied the intricacies of religious texts since girlhood, and she was ready to marshal every resource to protect her marriage, and most importantly, Mary's future. As the king's doubts intensified in the mid-1520s, he enlisted one of the most powerful churchmen in Europe to help him secure a formal annulment, Cardinal Thomas Wolsey. Wolsey was the king's chief advisor, a man who had risen from humble origins to enormous influence. Gifted in diplomacy and in managing the complex tapestry of European politics, Wolsey set out to convince Pope Clement VII that Henry's marriage violated sacred law. Yet the situation was far from simple. Pope Clement VII was effectively under the thumb of Catherine's nephew, Emperor Charles V, whose troops had ravaged Rome in 1527. With Charles's armies dominating Italy and the Pope's power severely constrained, any decision that threatened the emperor's familial interests would be dangerous. Clement VII risked stirring Charles's wrath if he declared Catherine's marriage invalid. From the king's standpoint, this was maddening. He believed that his dynastic security hung in the balance. He had pinned his hopes on Wolsey, trusting in his cardinal's reputation for deft negotiation and papal influence. But neither diplomacy nor legal argument was strong enough to overcome the political reality that Clement VII feared the Habsburg armies far more than he feared England's frustration. Seeing no easy way out, the Pope did the only thing he felt he could. He delayed. Annulment trials require final decisions, formal hearings, and papal rulings. Instead, Clement VII allowed the process to creep forward in exasperating slow motion, sending carefully worded missives that neither granted Henry what he wanted nor explicitly refused him. Frustrations flared in London and Rome alike. In 1528, Pope Clement took a halfway measure by dispatching Cardinal Lorenzo Campeggio to England as a special legate. Campeggio's mission was nominally to investigate the circumstances of Henry's marriage and see if there was some path to a compromise. In truth, his instructions were quite different. He was to stall in every possible way, making it clear to Wolsey that an annulment might never receive official papal sanction. Nonetheless, Henry hoped Campeggio's presence signaled genuine movement toward a verdict in his favor. Catherine, for her part, stood firm in the knowledge that her nephew's power cast a protective shadow over her. In 1529, formal proceedings finally got underway in England, and the spectacle captured every corner of the court. Not since the days of the Wars of the Roses had there been such fevered gossip at every noble dinner table and in every tapestry-lined corridor. Both Henry and Catherine appeared before a legatine court at Blackfriars, presided over by Cardinals Wolsey and Campeggio. The June sessions were especially dramatic. Catherine famously approached Henry, dropped to her knees, and delivered a heartfelt plea, reminding him that for 2 decades she had been a faithful wife, a counselor in matters of state, and a mother to his children, even if only one survived. She repeated her testimony that her first marriage to Arthur had never been consummated, and thus that she had not transgressed any divine or moral law. When she was done, Catherine rose with dignity and left the court, refusing to recognize its jurisdiction. She wanted the entire question taken to Rome, where the Pope might rule in her favor, especially under Charles V's watchful gaze. That day's spectacle, with a kneeling queen and a tense, agitated king, burned itself into the memories of everyone in attendance. Catherine's stand resonated widely. While some courtiers whispered in the king's ear about the urgency of securing his annulment, many more looked on with respect and pity for this queen, who so clearly believed in the rightness of her cause. Henry, however, fumed at the obstruction. He had expected a swift outcome, only to find that his own Cardinal Wolsey could not deliver results, and the papal legate was more interested in papal politics than in addressing the king's immediate need. By July 1529, Campeggio adjourned the sessions, effectively ending the hearing without a conclusion. It was a humiliating and enraging development for Henry. He had waited and schemed and argued, only to see everything stall in a legal quagmire. Publicly, Catherine emerged as a noble figure, the wronged wife defending her marriage. Wolsey, by contrast, suffered Henry's wrath. Accused of failing to secure papal support, Wolsey faced charges of praemunire, essentially being too loyal to a foreign authority, the Pope, over the King of England. Stripped of wealth and influence, Wolsey died in disgrace in 1530 before the king could imprison or possibly execute him. With Wolsey gone, a fresh figure stepped into the vacuum of power, Thomas Cromwell. A man of strong intellect and remarkable administrative skill, Cromwell looked at Henry's deadlock with Rome and arrived at a more radical, even revolutionary, idea. If the Pope refused to grant an annulment, perhaps England could sever its ties to the papacy altogether. It was a startling notion. Medieval Christendom had always recognized the Pope in Rome as the head of the universal church. But, emboldened by Reformation ideas creeping north from continental Europe, and by Martin Luther's earlier challenges to papal authority, Cromwell proposed that Henry himself be declared the supreme head of the church in England. This arrangement would, in theory, allow Henry to decide matters like his own annulment without the Pope's interference. By the early 1530s, the king's mindset had shifted. Anne Boleyn, one of Catherine's former ladies-in-waiting, had captured Henry's affections and ambitions. She was elegant, charismatic, and refused to be just another passing mistress. Henry wanted her as his rightful wife and queen, convinced that with her he might finally have the male heir he so desired. Catherine, still devout and steadfast, watched from the sidelines, conscious that her husband was slipping away, and that courtly favor was turning to Anne. In 1531, as an assembly of English clergy conceded that Henry, not the Pope, was the head of the English church, Catherine refused to bow to that claim. She would not yield to the notion that her lifelong faith and her marriage were subject to redefinition by a royal decree. Henry's patience had run thin. Effectively banishing Catherine from court, he relocated her to the moor in Hertfordshire. This move was devastating for Catherine, not merely because she was stripped of her role as queen consort, but because it separated her from her daughter, Mary. For Catherine, the forced distance between mother and child was akin to a wound that never healed. Each time she petitioned the king to let her see Mary, especially when the girl was ill, Henry rebuffed her. He feared that if mother and daughter were allowed to unite, they might find a way to reach Emperor Charles V and rally for an intervention. More than a private family matter, the separation was another chess move in Henry's power play to secure his new marriage. In late 1532, Henry secretly married Anne Boleyn in a small private ceremony. This was repeated more publicly in January 1533 when Anne was pregnant, presumably with the heir Henry had so long awaited. Thomas Cranmer, whom Henry had appointed Archbishop of Canterbury, quickly convened a special ecclesiastical court. In a flurry of rulings that had little pretense of neutrality, Cranmer declared Henry's marriage to Catherine invalid on the grounds that she had been his brother's widow. At the same time, he deemed the king's union with Anne entirely legitimate. It was a blunt declaration that turned Catherine into a mere bystander in official documents. The speed and efficiency with which these verdicts were reached underscored just how determined Henry was to have his way once freed from papal oversight. The blow to Catherine was formal and public, yet she did not lose heart. For her, the marriage remained valid in the eyes of God and the Church as she understood it. She refused the title Dowager Princess of Wales that Henry now insisted was her only rightful style, a reference to her status as Arthur's widow. She continued to sign letters and documents as Catherine the Queen, making it clear that she did not accept any lesser designation. Moreover, she championed Mary's claim as the rightful heir to the throne, Her daughter, she insisted, was not illegitimate. Many ordinary English subjects sympathized with her. Some openly questioned whether England was spurning a loyal and devout queen for the sake of the king's lust or ambition. Others whispered of curses and divine retribution. After all, Catherine was famously pious, and to turn her away might invite God's displeasure. While Henry's courtiers and the nobility largely followed the shifting political winds, a noticeable current of popular support for Catherine persisted, even as Anne Boleyn assumed the role and privileges of queenship. By 1534, the English Parliament formalized the break with Rome through a series of legislative acts, culminating in the Act of Supremacy. This law named Henry VIII as the supreme head of the Church of England, severing nearly all ties with papal authority. Whatever illusions remained that Henry and Rome might reconcile were effectively shattered. The king, now free of the Pope's judgments, pushed Catherine further into the margins. Her household was reduced, her finances carefully controlled, and her movements restricted. She was eventually sent to Kimbolton House, where she was permitted only a small retinue of attendants, many of them Spanish who had remained fiercely loyal to her. Letters she wrote to Charles V, still entreating him to intervene, reflected her unwavering stance. She urged him to petition the Pope to excommunicate Henry and to do whatever was necessary to protect Mary's inheritance. Yet Catherine's entreaties fell on uncertain ears. The emperor was embroiled in his own complexities across the Holy Roman Empire, trying to balance the delicate network of European alliances. Full-scale war with England was not necessarily on his immediate agenda, even to defend his aunt's position. In Rome, Pope Clement VII did issue proclamations against Henry's new marriage, but he was slow and cautious, still beholden to larger diplomatic chess games. All the while, Catherine's health began to wane. Rumors circulated, especially among her allies, that she was being poisoned, or that she was being given unhealthy living conditions so as to hasten her death. Later examinations suggest the reality was a form of cancer that affected her heart. The tragedy is that despite the extraordinary position she had once held, her final days were spent in near solitude, barred from seeing her only surviving child. She wrote passionately to Henry, beseeching him for permission to see Mary, or at least to let them communicate more freely. These requests were almost invariably denied. The king, engrossed in the life he was building with Anne Boleyn, showed little outward sympathy for Catherine's declining condition. The heartbreak of never reuniting with Mary likely weighed heavily on Catherine. Letters were their sole contact, and even these were monitored. Catherine continued to assert her queenship to the last, dressing as befit a queen, insisting that she be addressed properly, and demanding that the Church, under the true authority of the Pope, would eventually judge her cause just. On January 7, 1536, she passes away. The once lively princess from sunny Spain dies in the cold isolation of an English countryside, miles away from the glorious palaces of her childhood and the bright promise of her first wedding day. She's buried modestly at Peterborough Abbey, without the monument befitting a queen consort of England. History has sometimes overlooked Catherine of Aragon, favoring the flashier tale of Anne Boleyn or the later drama around Henry's subsequent wives. But Catherine's influence, her unwavering moral stance, and her refusal to capitulate remain one of the defining elements of the English Reformation era. Indeed, had she complied or gone quietly, the future of English religion and monarchy might have taken a very different path. Look back at her life and realize the remarkable resilience she possessed. She endured the heartbreak of multiple stillbirths and infant deaths, navigated a foreign court where she was often regarded as an outsider, faced the public humiliation of her husband seeking to set her aside, and clung to her dignity in the face of official decrees denying her queenship. All of it she bore with a fortitude that left a deep imprint on English hearts. No wonder that even in her final days, the general populace still referred to her lovingly as the Queen. Then there's the matter of her intellectual contributions. Catherine was not only pious but also progressive in her patronage of humanist scholarship. She championed the education of women, bringing the Spanish humanist Juan Luis Vives to England, encouraging him to write The Education of a Christian Woman. This was a treatise calling for the moral and intellectual development of women, an innovative stance in a time when female literacy was still rare among the nobility, let alone the masses. Catherine recognized the power of knowledge to elevate the spirit, and that spark influenced many in English society, including her own daughter, Mary. The path that Catherine's legacy took after her death is also telling. Henry remarried 5 more times, searching for that elusive son who would secure his dynasty. He finally had Edward VI with Jane Seymour, but Edward's reign was short-lived, just 6 years. In a twist of fate that must have made many reflect on Catherine's quiet determination, it was her daughter Mary who eventually claimed the throne in 1553. Mary Tudor became the first official queen regent of England, ruling in her own right. While Mary's reign proved tumultuous, it embodied the very possibility that the dynasts around Catherine had once dismissed. A woman could indeed hold the English throne. One cannot help but see the echoes of Catherine's indomitable spirit in Mary's own resolve.